Well, welcome to another episode of the Leadership Enigma. And I think one of the benefits of the Enigma is the network and finding and connecting our network in mysterious and wonderful ways. So this is a great episode because I've got two great guests with me today. I have Carol Day, who will explain all about herself in relation to her experience within sport and what she's doing and why she's doing and how she's doing things right now. But I've also got Mitchell Feldman from Xrai Glass back into the studio. And we'll hear all about how they are connected. So come back to me straight after this. Hi, I'm Adam Pacifico, and welcome to the Leadership Enigma, a world-ranked, award-winning podcast that's insatiably curious as regards what leaders do, how they do it, and importantly, why. We'll delve into the human doing, but even deeper into the human being and the power of human-centered leadership to drive sustainable change. So whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts and disruptors, as together we will discover that success leaves clues. So Carol, it's a massive welcome to the Leadership Enigma.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Now this isn't your first time to the Enigma, is it?
It's not my first time, but this is the first time in front of the cameras and in front of the microphone. So, and my first time ever on a podcast, actually. So, yeah, you've got my first.
I'm very honoured, actually. This is your first time, and you're seeing the new studio for the first time as well.
Yeah, it's very bling.
Because it was different last time you were here.
Very bling. Love it.
Now, I didn't do much of an introduction at all because in some ways I wanted to keep this link that we've got between you a little secret for a reveal. But just explain to everybody your background. Tell a little bit about your history.
Well, my history is mostly in football,
Yep.
Elite sports. I started work at the age of 14 in my local club, Wycombe Wanderers, which I loved. And since then, it's taken me on to work for the FA for 16 years.
Right.
Doing various different jobs. The last 12 years working with the England national teams as a team operations manager. So basically organising everything for them, their flights, their accommodation, doing the call-ups for the players, so letting them know they've been called up to play for England.
Oh, you do that as well?
I did that as well, yes. So wow. I was the one to send the calls initially, and then it went on to texts, WhatsApp, etc.
Was that the good with the bad? Did you tell them they didn't make it?
Invariably, if they didn't hear from me, they hadn't made it, and the manager would have probably made those phone calls in advance anyway. Okay. So
that was going to be my next question, so I'm glad you asked it.
Yeah, thankfully that wasn't down to me particularly. And I left the FA 10 years ago, having met my now husband, the ex-England footballer and manager Stuart Pearce, and I now work with him on a daily basis doing leadership and motivational speaking, also helping him organise things like his media work and broadcast work. But the thing that we most enjoy doing together is the leadership and motivational side of things, but very unusual for me to be the one that's speaking.
And quite right, so I think front and centre in the studio. So that was the last time you were here, was when Stuart was in.
Correct,
and we did that particular episode.
Yes, and I was the other side of the screen, sort of getting frustrated because he hadn't mentioned that and he hasn't mentioned that, and I'll be doing the same, I'm sure, when I go home tonight. I didn't mention that. Well,
you're lucky, as I say. He's not here, so he can't do anything.
Exactly.
So we can have fun with it. Just help me with one thing. A lot of focus now, you mentioned, is in relation to leadership.
Yes.
And when we were chatting to Stuart, he had really thought about how to link experiences on the field, nationally and internationally, to leadership.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about, because again, you've got hugely rich experience in relation to seeing people within elite sports and how that can now benefit anyone in a leadership position. So tell me a little bit about your thinking and why you're so interested in that direction of travel now.
There are a lot of parallels between sport and business.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing we really enjoy looking at. When we go into companies now, whether it's corporate companies or other sporting organisations, we sort of look at where they're at, where their business is going, where they want it to go, their sort of challenges they're having at the moment. And there's so many of them, you can find a football story to tie it in, whether it's about adversity or resilience. Teamwork is obviously a big one, management, motivation. And the links are there, and what we find is that when you put it in a football context, people sometimes get it.
Yeah.
Because they hear all these buzzwords about leadership and management, and there's a lot of it out there at the moment. And particularly in conferences, sometimes when you hear that same voice from someone within an organisation, it's a bit like, oh, here we go again. You get somebody in from external that's probably known to a lot of people as well, and you start talking about, this is what happened within my football career, and this is how that reflects on you as a business person.
Yes.
People go, the light bulb moments quite often happen. Yes, I get that. And they can relate very well to it then. And we find that works really, really well. And for us, one of the biggest things we find is when you come away from the conference, and I've been in the ladies' loo before now, and heard people talking and saying, oh, I hate football, but I tell you what, I really took something from that. I really understood the way he put it, and that's when you think, we're doing a good job here and it's working.
That's the power of bringing the outside in, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I think you're
it's
right.
a different voice, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a different voice. When you're hearing a different voice and it's being put in a slightly different way, it resonates. It can resonate a little bit more. And obviously we intermingle that with our own stories, particularly Stuart's, obviously, from his wealth of experience. But between us, we've both worked with the elite football teams. We've both worked on the Olympics, the Team GB Olympics. And I've been lucky enough, since Stuart and I have been working together, that we've been out to Borneo and Brunei and worked with the Gurkha regiments. We've been into the army, other businesses. So there's a lot there now that we can now talk about from the point of view of leadership and particularly sport.
I guess that when you're looking at everything now, I mean, effectively you're a storyteller, right? And you're translating what's happening on the field into commercial stories.
Correct, yes.
Right, so it's quite interesting looking at all of the canvas of your life, whether it's going to the far out places that you were just mentioning, and how can I translate that into a story? That's something that would excite me thinking about.
It's what really excites us. We do a lot of other work, but the work that we really enjoy is the leadership work. And it's been really interesting for me because over the last sort of couple of days, knowing I've been coming here, I've sort of rethought myself about sort of leadership, and I never really saw myself as a leader. But looking back, I probably was, and I probably bring a lot of that within it as well. So Stuart and I work quite closely together. And I've got more of a business brain. He's got very much a ex-sportsman's brain. And together, sort of that works really well.
Well, I was going to ask that question about how deliberate now do you find that you sit down together, and with that, as you say, those two different perspectives, you start to deconstruct your combined experience and say, hang on, this is actually relevant to this is relevant to this. Because remember when we had Stuart here, we were chatting away, we talked about lots of elements of leadership, and he immediately had stories that evidenced it. So have you sat down and been quite deliberate about that? Because I talk to CEOs who sometimes say, how do I unpack my 35 years of work in order now to give back and storytell? So how deliberate has that process been?
Very deliberate, really, because I mean, what we do is we start with almost a title or a word. For example, a phrase, working under pressure.
Yes.
And then we will think back on our experiences. Well, where did we work under pressure? How did we deal with that from a football perspective, and how can we then put that into the business perspective?
Yes.
So it is quite structured and quite deliberate in the way that we put the presentations together, depending on what the client wants. So, but it is really interesting. When we first started doing it, it was very much led by Stuart.
Right.
Rightly so, because of his
from those experiences.
Yeah.
But now, and also I worked with him for 7 years before we started doing this.
Right.
So I also have that time when we were together working on the Olympics, working with the under-21s, where, I can now look back and say, well, actually, you did that. He might not have known it, but I saw it.
So you give a different perspective almost on that experience.
Exactly.
Okay.
And him with me as well. So that works really well. And sometimes he doesn't even realise where I said, well, the impact you had on this particular occasion with that member of staff or that player, do you realise that was the impact you had?
Yeah.
Oh, no, not really. And then
It's almost like a coach, isn't it? Because you can give a slightly different perspective
very much so.
on
and
something.
then we deconstruct that, because I'm looking at it from the outside looking in.
Right.
And Stuart's got very much a sportsman's mind and a coach,
well, he
manager.
lives and breathes the football side, doesn't he? So you give a different perspective to that.
And he's obviously got all the stories in the main.
And we're going to come back to
from his experiences. but I can now see that, and it works really, really well.
We definitely want to hear more from you soon in relation to your experiences of having to, in some ways, corral an entire England team. I think it's fascinating that you were ringing them up saying, you're in, and they hadn't heard from you.
Amongst other things.
But let me do a quick reintroduction of Mitchell, because Mitchell, welcome back to the Enigma.
Thank you. Thanks for having me
we saw
again.
you quite recently, but just again do a little bit of an introduction of what you're doing right now.
So I am a co-founder of a business called Xrai Glass.
Yep.
And we provide solutions for the deaf and hard of hearing to break down barriers and engage with the conversation around them. And we do that through a number of ways, through an app, through devices such as glasses, augmented reality glasses, televisions, events. Really, one thing that we've learned over the last couple of years or 18 months is really how quiet the world is for deaf people. So actually bringing subtitles to events is something quite new for people. There is a momentum there to increase that adoption of it, which is fantastic. And our technology enables that. So ultimately we are an app or a piece of software that takes real-time conversations from the outside world and turns them into text.
Now, people can go back just maybe a couple of months and see the full episode that we did together, and actually the demo. We even did a demo video of just fill in the gaps, because I know you've had an extraordinary few months, and I think you've been recognised and rewarded, and I see you on television now. So just tell everyone a little bit about what's happened over the last 6 to 8 weeks.
So actually, which is a nice segue to meeting Carol, is we've been doing a lot with sports. Notably, we've been working with the England's deaf football team, women's football team specifically, with a fabulous girl called Claire Stancliffe and all of her colleagues who are going out to Malaysia for the championships in September. And there is a feature this week on I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, on the One Show.
Of course you can here. We're all inclusive on this show.
So on the One Show, talking about how this will impact their lives. So they're not allowed to use technology on the field, and clearly using glasses is not right for a football environment.
So it keeps that neutrality for all.
Exactly. But what it does do is halftime team talks, particularly when they're going to Malaysia for the translation.
Yes.
Piece, right? Because not only are they deaf, but there's also language barriers as well. So to reduce that friction for all of them, to make them more included, is really, really interesting. And, we've been helping them to understand the power of this platform. We're also trying to help them raise their profile, because unfortunately they're not sponsored to go to the championship. They have to fundraise themselves. So they've been on this mission to raise money to go to Malaysia. I believe they're almost there.
They're crowdfunding. Right.
So it's really interesting meeting this intersection of sport and health and hearing, or deafness or hard of hearing, is really interesting. And to hear Carol's story, and particularly her affinity to that cause, was really exciting for me to come today.
Well, that's the perfect segue, isn't it? Because people might be listening or watching and thinking, now, this is a unique duo. How have you come to have, and I say this is the power of the network. So, Carol, let me come back to you. How are we connecting the dots?
Well, there's a couple of things. When you first mentioned to me about Xrai, I was very keen to come and listen and learn a little bit more. Personally, I'm hard of hearing, have been since birth. I also have tinnitus, which is not a great thing to live with, but you do. Also, since I've come away from sort of the full-time football, I now volunteer hearing dogs for deaf people, and I work with a profoundly deaf woman called Amanda, who's fantastic. So my brain is going 10 to the dozen in sort of a number of different ways.
Yes.
My first thought when you were talking about the team situation there was the one thing with football teams, particularly in a tournament environment, is you have such a small amount of time to get a lot done with those players. You're talking tactics, you have meetings, as you were saying, team talks before, a half time and after. And that must take some time, I would think, without this kind of technology, because it all has to be translated,
full time pressure
signed,
as well, right?
Etc. Exactly. But when you're in a tournament environment, you play, you might have a rest day, you've then only got a day or two, limited time in meetings to actually get the information across to the players. This could be an absolute game changer.
So am I right in thinking that the teams could use the technology at half time, and then during the actual match they can't use the technology?
So there is zero technology during the match. I mean, anyone's got a cochlear implant, they have to disconnect the cochlear implant.
Right.
So where people were like maybe putting their glasses in a box, everyone's just throwing their cochlear implants. I mean, it's quite something to see. But certainly during half time. But it's also the accessibility side, because you're not always going to get a deaf interpreter. You're not always going to get someone who is available for sign language. And it comes at a cost as well. It's quite a significant cost because it's quite a unique skill. So absolutely half time. Even after the event where the coaches are giving their speaker or their notes or summaries, being able to engage in that conversation and ask using things like ChatGPT, natural word queries of that information is really, really interesting.
And we're definitely going to come back to the ChatGPT side of things. But Carol, just share with us a little bit about what's it been like living with that condition and the work that you've done and the environments that you've been in, would you say, which has been very fast-paced, and perhaps people haven't even known or realised that you're dealing with something. So what's that been like for you?
In the main, I haven't really mentioned it as I've been going through my work in life. My direct bosses knew,
right?
Because when I was in meetings, I'd always try and sit. It's my left ear that I have an issue with. I'd always make sure that I was sat at the front with my left ear pointing to most of, any speech that's happening. So in the main, people didn't necessarily. And the tinnitus is a completely, you can't see that anyway, so you would never know that was an issue.
Right.
I'm sure there's been times when people have asked me questions and I've just smiled and nodded and they've thought, well, that's not getting much back from her. But in the main, I've been lucky in that I'm not profoundly deaf. I'm only sort of hard of hearing.
Yes.
So you just learn to live with it. And we were talking earlier about the lip reading as well. I lip read a fair amount, but that does make me look quite intense when I'm staring at people. People must think, whoa.
That must be an incredibly difficult skill, I'm thinking, to lip reading.
It's not easy, particularly as people speak really fast.
Yes.
I know I'm doing it now. And if they don't know, then they're not forming the words properly, and because that helps. If somebody does know, then they can slow down,
enunciate,
form the words, enunciate, does make it easier.
Have you found that as well?
Well, so things like I found out that if you've got a beard, it's really hard to lip read.
Right. Oh, there you go.
And also, it tires you because you are constantly post-processing information, because I'm lip reading you and then understanding what those lips meant whilst listening to the next part of the conversation. So it's really, really hard. It's really hard to lip read, certainly for any long periods of time.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
I was just thinking,
really
I was at Billy Joel in the Park recently, and I remember seeing the sign folk who were, and so they're in some ways they're trying to do two things at once, and then they switch every about 15 or so minutes. So I'm just thinking to myself, it must be unbelievably tiring.
Yeah, it
the
is.
mental focus to do all of that.
But wasn't that brilliant? I was at the Bruce Springsteen one.
The day before or after, right?
The person who was
It's
doing the
amazing.
sign language
Yeah.
was doing all the guitar moves.
Oh,
and everything.
yeah.
It was
They were
brilliant.
properly
Totally.
into it.
Absolutely.
So-
I was watching that rather than Bruce. Sorry, Bruce.
But it makes it quite cool because, people who are deaf or hard of hearing typically have to watch TV at 2:00 in the morning onwards to get any sort of sign language capabilities. But actually seeing that where they're dancing to the songs and mimicking the guitar playing is incredible. And that is bringing these two worlds of the hearing and the non-hearing together closer. And I love that. That's a great initiative.
Yeah,
One of the reasons I was really excited that we would all get together is the podcast has been focusing more and more now on the human being as opposed to just the human doing. And we have amazing guests all the time. But we get to unpeel a little bit. And I'm intrigued in something, Carol, is at what point did you start maybe to become more open or vocal about what you were dealing with in relation to how that could help others or sharing understanding?
With regards to the hearing.
Yeah, for you. Because obviously you're working in a high pressurized environment, you're working in elite sport, you're working with huge corporations. And so in some ways, did you start to think, I need to be more open about what I'm dealing with in relation to?
Yeah, and less embarrassed. I think the older you get, the less conscious you are, or self-conscious you are, I think.
Yeah.
And it also got to the point where I thought I can do my job better if people actually know
Right.
that maybe there's a slight issue there. So I made sure, say, all my managers knew, all my head coaches knew, almost from day one, to say to them, look, if I don't answer you, don't think I'm being rude. Just say it again, say it louder, tap me on the shoulder, whatever it might be. As I say, I'm quite lucky in that I have a perfect hearing in my right ear.
Yes.
And I purposely move myself around to put myself in a situation where I can hear. But yeah, in certain high, meetings with UEFA, FIFA, draws, things like that, it was difficult. And you can't just stand up and say, oh, by the way, you can't do that. So you do have to adapt with it. But I certainly got more and more comfortable as I went on, and less embarrassed to say, I've got this slight issue, just bear with me.
Go on, Mitchell.
I know I was going to say, and that's true from what we've seen from numbers. Globally, 1 in 5 people are affected by some form of hearing loss. But in the UK, there are approximately 800,000 hearing aid users.
Right.
So there's a disconnect. 68 million people
Yeah, I
in
was
the
going
UK.
to say,
but
the
only
numbers don't stack up.
and because there is a stigma attached to wearing hearing aids, or people don't want to really admit that they have a problem with their hearing. There's classic signs that you walk into the house and the TV's on full blast. These are classic signs that people are losing their hearing. But yeah, and I think with this whole new world that we live in, of people coming forward and standing up and saying, look, I do have a problem, or I have a condition that I actually own and I'm happy with it, but you need to know about it, actually is a great stride forward for humanity, right? And people
Absolutely.
like yourself coming forward with that. We saw, it was incredible. We went to a company, a famous bank in London, where we took the glasses in, and they emailed all of the staff saying, we've got this initiative, if anyone's interested, would you come and have a look? There was this one girl, bless her heart, who came in, lady, not a girl, and she put them on and she burst out crying, and she had been living with hearing loss her entire 8 years of working for this firm and had never told them.
Wow.
And this was so emotional for her, so liberating for her. And actually, she's emailed me subsequently to say that her whole work culture has changed since she's told everybody.
We're getting more and more people being quite open now, especially in relation to things such as neurodiversity, including my daughter, who was actually been a guest on this show. But Carol, have you also found that as you've been more open, other people, you've had this kind of reaction too, where someone else has said, actually, I struggle with the same thing, or actually, I've never. So have you found in some ways you've motivated, inspired someone to say, oh, actually, maybe I need to come, be more open with what I'm dealing with?
Absolutely, and I think it's made people also a little bit more aware and maybe look out for it a little bit more with regards to other people that they interact with as well. So I don't think there was too many other people, certainly in my work environment, that had the same issue, but there was sort of, here and there I'd bump into people and they'd say, oh, that's really good to know, thank you for saying it, or, it's... But yeah, I think you have to be open about these things, otherwise... people are you're not going to be able to do your job properly. You're not going to be able to communicate properly.
Yes.
And sometimes you do need a little bit of help.
It's the confidence, isn't it, sometimes to have that conversation.
Absolutely. And I was I had a hearing aid not for very long, because at the time when I was fitted for a hearing aid, the technology wasn't there and it didn't work with my tinnitus, because obviously a hearing aid, the idea is to block out background noise, and if you have background noise, naturally it doesn't overly work. And I will be honest, and I haven't been back to see if the new technology would work better for me, and maybe that's something I should do, but...
And the devices now are really discreet as well. It's not like...
Incredibly discreet,
There used to be a rather large
well, it was like the equivalent
on the back of your ear, didn't they?
Exactly,
Which
it's like
doesn't
the
help,
equivalent
does
of the
it?
National Health glasses, but in hearing aid format. Yeah.
So I want to ask Carol another question. I'm going to come to you for kind of a technological update, Mitchell, is... You tried the glasses just before we started this episode.
Yes.
What was that like?
Absolutely fantastic.
Just explain to us kind of how you felt and I don't know, what was your thinking? Because obviously this is something that could actually help you and you're impacted by this.
Yeah, other than feeling incredibly cool, I'm feeling like it was sort of like James Bond-esque.
Someone's smiling now.
Yeah, which is fantastic. I tell you what, it automatically gave you a real sense of freedom.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
In the sense that I don't think I'll miss any. I'm not going to miss anything.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Wow.
miss part of this conversation, which is huge, and because you do miss out on stuff. Sometimes I find myself almost switching off.
Right.
If I'm listening into a conversation and I've missed so much of it, I almost find myself switching off. So I'm like, well, I'm lost now. I'm completely lost because I've no idea what they're talking about, and they've gone off on a tangent and I can't hear.
Yes.
Whereas with these glasses, you automatically think, well, I'm not going to miss anything. This is fantastic. I'm going to know exactly
Right.
what they're saying. I'm not going to have that awkward thing when somebody turns to you and saying, what do you think? And you're sat there going,
7.
yeah, exactly. Just smile and nod. And
What are the circumstances that are most challenging for you then, in order to be able to hear properly?
Pubs,
Right.
not so much the clubs anymore.
Yeah, we're all
Sadly.
So you're talking
But
about large
that
social gathering, right?
that social environment,
With
and even
lots of ambient noise.
networking events.
Right.
For what we
Okay.
do now, you know, in the work that we do, we go to quite a few networking events, dinners.
Yes.
You know, I'm on a table with clients that you're trying to sell the ideas
Yes.
to, and you're talking to them, and
Right.
you know, you've got things going on all around you, and it's very difficult. You have to really focus, as we were saying earlier, really focus on what's being said. And if somebody then comes in from the other side of the table,
It's hard.
it's then really hard. You then got to.
Must be exhausting.
It is exhausting. It can be exhausting.
Okay.
And as I say, I've got sort of 12% hearing in this ear and a great right. So for the people that are even more hard of hearing, it must be, you know, I have an understanding
Yeah.
that it must be extremely exhausting. But these glasses and the app, even just the app itself, if you don't have the glasses,
Could
to
help.
be able to look at it and know that you're not going to miss anything. You are going to be able to engage. You're going to be able to fully see that conversation through.
Okay.
Is a sense of freedom.
Well, I mean, just to that point, and thank you for that. It's great to hear, and something we hear a lot. But you know, particularly like networking events, if we lean into the technology side, so we use voice thumbnails. So once I've listened to you and I understand and I've labelled you as Carol, the next time I meet you, wind forward a few weeks, possibly even a few months, we'll be able to recall that back. So the next time I meet you, I can get prompts to say, don't forget it's Carol Day, or don't forget that she worked for the FA for 10 years, as prompts. And when you are networking, you're getting all of that super memory aiding you, which is incredible. And we're seeing this change. You know, this change with AI is a bigger innovation as the internet itself, right? And
We're
the
at a
use.
point in time. it's
We
been
are a
described
point
now.
in time, and we'll look back and say that was, you know, I was there when AI was really invented. And we will see that this will impact not just people who are deaf or hard of hearing, neurodivergent, and those who are without any conditions. It's an amazing time to be alive.
So
It
just
really is.
just give us a little bit of a summary then of how can these glasses help at the moment, and where do you think this is going to end up?
So today, naturally, they can
Yeah.
engage or enable people who are deaf or hard of hearing to get involved in conversations.
Yes.
Particularly where we were talking about before with lip reading, even if you are the most proficient lip reader, it does take its toll on you. Being able to recall those conversations, so ask questions of your previous conversations with technologies, large language models as they're known, such as ChatGPT, and the ability to answer those questions. But where it will be going forward, you know, we're not a million miles away, and it's not our direction of travel.
Mm-hmm.
But when the next iteration of these glasses come out, where you've got cameras in them, so we have a different mode of data. So you have this multimodal world that we live in, where you can start understanding your environment, and effectively these could enable people who are visually impaired. So like your Tesla or electric car has autonomous vehicle capabilities, imagine the glasses being able to tell you in front of you is a road, or those traffic lights are red, or there's an incoming car.
Yeah.
Or again, for someone who's deaf or hard of hearing, the alarm bell's going off, the fire alarm's going off, which they may not be able to hear, particularly that high-pitched sound. So we don't honestly. We're finding out as we're going along. You know what they say when you create a startup, it's like jumping off a cliff and building a plane on the way down. That's what we've been doing, but we've been finding out all of these use cases, things like auditory processing disorder, which we may have spoken about in the last.
We did briefly, yeah.
But this is where you can hear and see everything, but you can't cognitively process it, even though you can hear it. But if you read it, you can. So who knows what other conditions or situations we can help, and we're finding out. Our users are telling us.
So we have so many amazing young people working in our organisation, and hopefully lots watching and listening. But Carol, kind of, what are your thoughts for anyone who's starting out in their career and wanting to be their best, do their best, and achieve anything, but they are struggling with something, or they, in some ways, are not being as open as they perhaps could be, and maybe lack the confidence for now? Any kind of thoughts or advice for the younger generation who are thinking, yeah, I really want to be my best, but I need to deal with something?
For me, I think the young people of today are in a very enviable position, actually. Right. I think, in that the world as we know it is far, far more accepting. It's more understanding of all sorts of, not just conditions, but I don't think there's anything out there these days that people sort of balk at and think, oh, I don't know about that. Mm-hmm. I think we're so much more understanding that everybody's different, everybody's unique, and that's the way to look at it. You're unique. There's nobody else like you out there. You are one of a kind, and embrace that. Ask for help. Probably one thing I didn't do in my younger days, especially going into such a high-profile, high-powered kind of environment. I probably didn't ask for help enough because of an embarrassment factor, or there was nobody else out there that had the same issues I did. That I think if you're a young person going in, don't let it stop you doing anything that you want to do. Yeah. I always wanted to be a TV presenter, bizarrely. Never did, because I thought, well, I can't have anything in my ear telling me what's going on, right, because I wouldn't hear it. Didn't even pursue it.
So that impacted on your choices?
It did. Yeah. It's something I always wanted to do. Now, don't get me wrong, no regrets. I've had the most amazing career within football. Wouldn't change it for the world, but that's where I was, but didn't go down that route because I felt there was restrictions that I couldn't get over. I didn't ask anybody whether I could get over them. I just made an assumption that I couldn't. Yeah. And I think these days, the younger generation there's far more understanding, far more help, that you can do whatever you want to do. And the other thing I would say to all kids, which is sort of slightly off tilt a little bit, is do something that you love. It's so key.
Makes the day go faster.
Exactly. You're at work a lot of hours in the day, and I sort of speak to people at a lot of our networking events that maybe have kids that want to be, can you advise on how my son or daughter could be a professional footballer? And I often say to them...
There's a $64 million question.
Isn't it? But what I often say to them is the chances of them being, not wanting to burst any bubbles, or shatter any dreams, but the chances of them being a professional footballer are remote. Yeah. Aim for that. Please, absolutely aim for that, because... people do make it, of course. But if you don't think you're going to be good enough to be a professional footballer, you can be an accountant within the footballing world. You could be a lawyer. You can be a sports scientist, a physio. Mm-hmm. You love football, so go into that, but do something within that industry that is something different, and you'll still love it. For me, starting off as a sort of a secretary, my careers advisor was a bit like, well, be a secretary, be a PA. Okay, great. I fell into what I did. I fell into football, but I loved it, so I've always loved football.
And go to what
Shoot
you
for
love.
The stars, and I've worked with some of the elite footballers, the names that are already out there. You know, I worked with Gareth Southgate for a number of years, and a lot of the players that are now in the England squad were in my under-21s. And,
nice to see them go through, right?
I gave some of those their first call-up. Not me personally, but I made the call to give them their first call up. Yeah. So you can be heavily involved and wear the badge, and be proud to represent your country, just in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting? I was just listening to what you were saying there about giving advice to people. You know, I get asked a lot for work advice, particularly when people are saying, "Can you talk to my son? He's a bit lost." And one of the first questions I ask is like, "What makes you smile? You know, what activity do you do that really excites you?" And start from that basis to understand, because no one, particularly when you're young, no one knows what they want to do. They really don't.
Yeah.
I may speak to many kids who were from 16 to sort of 25. They just don't know. I certainly didn't know at that age. I had to make loads of mistakes. And I never really had anyone that sort of pointed me in a direction. I wish I did. And so I find it a great responsibility. And so it's interesting. And also the part before that you were talking about, you know, we live in this time now where it's acceptable to be different.
Absolutely.
You know, I think that there was, certainly when I was younger, there was like this is what you must look like and this is how you must behave. Today it's okay to be perfectly imperfect, right? Is that, and actually to own that and say, I am unique, I am my own brand, and that's a really lovely place to be. That's a really, really
Wouldn't it be
lovely place
dull if we were all the same?
Yeah.
Well, I love what you said. Is, you know, just be you because everyone else is taken, right? So just
Love that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I love that.
in many ways. And I hope people are watching and listening to this and thinking, actually, when you are different, when you are working with something, I'm not going to say struggling with something, actually that could be your superpower. There's something about you that you mentioned it earlier. It makes you unique. It can make you different. It can make you see, hear, and think about things very differently, apart from maybe the way that some of us have sometimes processed it to deal with things in almost a cookie cutter way. I want to bring this back to the leadership piece, because obviously with all the experiences that you've had, and I'll start with you, Carol, with the work that you're doing at the moment, and you're doing a lot of work quite deliberately within leadership.
Yes.
What are some of the things that you're seeing and hearing that are really important at the moment on leaders' minds in 2023, when the world has gone slightly mad?
It absolutely
What are some of the
has
things
gone
that
very
you're
mad.
seeing and hearing and that you're actively working on in order to, in some ways, contribute to?
One of the interesting things that I've found that's sort of come up in the last couple of years,
Yep.
and I hate to bring the C word up, COVID.
Are we beyond that? I know.
But what I found is I've had an experience of leading and managing sort of almost away from your team.
Right.
When I worked at the FA and I had my team, who also looked after my team of team operations guys, we were all travelling. We were very rarely in the office together.
Yeah.
That's not an easy place to lead. It's quite difficult when you've got people all over the world, in our cases, all over the country, yet you're still trying to sort of
Have a sense of
guide
team.
them. Yeah, you're still trying to guide them. You're still trying to be a leader to them. You're trying to teach them. You're trying to inspire them. All the things that we want our leaders to be. That's not easy when you see them once a month.
Yes.
You know, because that's the nature of the work we did. I
Yep.
was always travelling. They were always travelling. It was the one thing that was always the biggest challenge
Right.
for me as a manager and a leader. And now I'm seeing it with a lot of companies, this nod towards home working, which I think is good for mental health, that you've got
Yeah.
that opportunity
The
to work
flexibility.
from home, the flexibility, exactly. And it's one of the things that's coming up quite a lot with leaders is, yeah, but I don't see my team from 1 week to the next because they're working from home, or how do I inspire that? Zoom calls are great, but it's not that
only do
one-on-one
so much.
interaction. Yeah,
Well, you don't
you
get
can
those
only do
water
so much.
cooler moments.
Exactly, and that seems to be one of the biggest challenges I think that
Yeah.
that are coming in, and I always used to try and make sure that I called them on a regular basis, my team on a regular basis, particularly if they knew we were in some far-flung country, you know, in the middle of
Yeah.
Montenegro for one, you know.
What good
Straight
choice.
up, yeah, exactly. To make sure I rang them and said, how you doing? You
Yeah.
need any advice? Everything going all right? Just so that they knew that they were valued, listened to, somebody was thinking of them.
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes it's not always easy to ring and ask for help, whereas if I've rung them, that gives them the opening to say, well, actually, now you've called, and I found that a lot.
Yeah.
Now you've called, actually, you could help me with this, and this.
That's you being proactive. We always say that,
Yeah.
you know, if you're leading and managing a team, actually your leadership is energy expensive.
Yes.
To proactively reach out, talk to people, as you say, to open up that
Yeah.
dialogue, because sometimes it won't come to you, will it?
Absolutely. And the one thing I've really thought about before coming into this podcast was when I first started making notes, I found myself making notes as to what I did as a manager,
Right.
rather than a leader. And I think there's very often there's no distinction between management and leadership, whereas actually management is very process driven, isn't it? It's about PDRs, it's about disciplinary, it's about hiring, firing, it's all of that, whereas leadership is very different. Of course there's a crossover, of course there is, and I sort of look back on my career and I think I was probably, and only the people that worked with me will know, but I was probably a better leader than I was a manager.
Right.
Because that was my interest. And sometimes I felt that I was maybe held back from that because I had to do the tick boxes of management, make sure the PDRs were done, make sure the holiday forms were filled in, all of that. Whereas actually what I wanted to do was be with my team.
Yeah.
And leading, inspiring, teaching, getting to know them. Because for me, that's that human element, which is far more me. I'm a people person, and
you're in the right place. The focus for us is human-centered leadership. So
absolutely. And I'm not sure all leaders necessarily have that distinction between managing and leading, because you can be a leader without being a manager, and vice versa. In fact, a lot of leaders are not necessarily under that banner of manager.
I'm a terrible manager, but a good leader.
Yeah.
And I try and humanize as much as I can. That old adage of culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's true. Never so true in football, where you've got the team where they're all friends and they're all fighting for each other. I've heard Stuart talk many a time about his relationship with Gascoigne, because he was like a real team player. Potentially not, maybe, but. And one thing that I found when I've been into businesses is, this big experiment of the home working is great. It's not without its challenges. I actually find it a real challenge working from home all the time, and actually miss those water cooler moments.
Absolutely.
But also, understanding my peers and their lives as well. One of the exercises I did with one of the businesses I'm involved with is we did this 2 truths and a lie, where everyone in the business had to come forward, and they're quite profound things that they come up with. And actually understanding the people that are in the business, not just their day-to-day roles and their performance measures and all of those, but actually getting to know those, helped build a better culture within the business. And knowing that my colleague has looked after his disabled brother for the last 30 years and has been his carer, built my team closer together. And that's where I can see leaders investing more time in understanding your people and what programs them and what their lives are like outside of work is an incredibly powerful tool.
It's absolutely key. It's one of the things that Stuart and I speak a lot about, is getting to know the people around you. And I know I went back into work with the under-21s. The under-21s that have just won the European
I was going to say,
can
we just sit and celebrate?
Very proud of those boys.
Yeah.
I worked with them at the start of their campaign for a couple of trips. Took them out to Andorra and Slovenia and worked with those guys. And it was a new group of staff to me.
Right.
I took over from Jenny, who looks after the 21s. She couldn't do the trips for personal reasons, so I just jumped in, didn't know any of these people. And the head coach, Lee Carsley, said to me quite early on the first trip, would you take the staff meeting?
Yeah.
And so I said, yeah, no problem at all. I sat back and thought, okay, how am I going to do this? So I sat down and said, right, everybody okay? Everybody did the usual stuff, the tick box in, anybody got anything to report? Everybody happy? Right. Tell me one thing about yourself that nobody else will know. And it's absolutely fascinating. I say to people, if you get the opportunity to do this with a new group of people, whether it's at work or social, it's fascinating. We had somebody that had been on Bullseye and won a bully. I mean, it's just little things. And I've done this before with other teams as well.
That wasn't someone from the under-21 squad.
No, it was one of the staff members, actually. Somebody else that had sung with Status Quo, been on stage and sung with Status Quo, and somebody else's legs were in Stuart Little, the film.
Right.
Their legs were used in Stuart Little. I mean, there was some really random stuff.
Well, there's 3 great ones.
Well, my one was I won the Sky version of Blind Date.
Fantastic.
And my cousin was Marty Feldman.
There you go.
There you go.
2 things we didn't know.
And they're things, and it starts conversations. And what was really satisfying is days later, people were still talking about.
Yeah, agreed.
You know, tell me about that situation.
Because
Tell me
it's
about
interest
that.
and
How
commonality.
did you do that? It is,
Yeah.
and it's also
Curiosity.
It's also curiosity, and it's also something that isn't about what you're there to do.
Yeah.
We were there to win football matches, and actually all these stories had nothing to do with football, which is great because it just freshens up your views of people, and
That
you might know them as a
camaraderie.
coach, or you know them as the video analyst, or you know them as the physio,
Yeah.
and that's about it. Whereas now you know them as, you know, that person that can't ride a bike, or that, you know, that person that, whatever it may have been,
Yeah.
that can actually
it's
see.
that human. It's that human piece.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
and I've got
it's
a
key.
little golden nugget for anyone that's maybe in sales more than anything.
Yeah.
Is one of the lessons that I learned very early on in sales was to cross the divide between work and personal. And what I mean by that is I always had my Facebook as my personal life, or Instagram as my personal life, and LinkedIn as my work
Yeah.
outfit. Actually, the quicker I brought people into my personal world,
Yes.
so they got that subliminal understanding of who I am, that they know I like Arsenal, or they know I like going to concerts, it created deeper relationships with my customers and my partners and my staff. And actually, it's a really good tip of anyone out there who's doing sales, is connect with everyone. Connect with them on all platforms and share the information. Obviously, be meaningful and purposeful with what you post and respectful. But it's a really good business tip, is to bring people in and humanize them, not just tick boxes.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely, and it was the same for players, you know,
Yeah.
I found, because I think you also have, and it's something that I know sort of Stuart has in his life. Obviously, his nickname is Psycho.
That was his book.
That was his book. But some people still think he's got that psycho persona. And it's sort of almost breaking down that barrier to get over that and say,
Yeah.
actually, that's not me at all. It was something that I was called, and it was part of my
Then.
playing career, but it's not who I am now. And I always found with players as well, I remember working with Craig Bellamy
Yeah.
with the Olympic squad. He came in, and Bella's had a little bit of a reputation, bit of a bad boy, not easy to work with, etc., etc. And I'll be honest, for the first couple of days, I was a bit sort of, don't know how to, a little bit scared, I'll be honest, you know, I don't know how to deal with him. And then we
Yes.
found some common ground, in that I found out he does some work with kids in Sierra Leone, and he's got his own sort of football academies almost
Wow.
out in Sierra Leone. So I asked him about it. He came into the office one day and I asked him about it.
Right.
Best buddies. By the end of it, best
That's-
buddies.
Yeah.
And it was, again, finding something personal that you can chat to them about. Because I could have gone through that whole 4-week period of being,
Yeah.
very sterile.
being
and,
poor.
yeah.
You know, I'm a bit scared of him. But, you know, lovely bloke.
I remember
Top
Stuart was quite candid when he was in the studio when he talked about, you know, the human being human doing. And he talked about the psycho was then. Actually, now the Stuart Pearce is very different now, and the work, and he was talking about that. So here's actually probably an unfair question to both of you, and that's, I know you've got some notes there and done some thinking, which is fabulous for this episode. Did you have any realizations about leadership, or some of the things that you had done, or make any new connections as you were thinking about coming onto the show, and some of the things that, you know, you've done or were considering? Or was there any standout for you?
Good question.
I'm going to ask you that as well, Mitchell. So start.
Okay, yeah, I've got mine locked.
Oh,
Have you?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
Go on then.
Oh yeah. So I think that you should never underestimate the impact that you have on people's lives at everything that you're doing. I remember once I did an event at Lord's Cricket Ground, and some young guy came up to me
Yeah.
and said, "You don't know who I am, but I saw you on stage a few years ago, and you inspired me to start my own business, and I now run an IT company with 20, 30 staff."
Wow.
And I had no idea that I would have that impact on him. And I've had a lot of things happen to me that I'm very proud of. That was one of the proudest moments for me that I had inspired someone else just by doing my day job, and it's made me be more premeditated to understand the importance that role has of being a speaker. So yeah, that was one of the lessons that I had learned.
And that really resonates, because in a lot of the work that we're doing with leaders, your role models, and your role models to people that you probably don't even know are actually seeing and hearing you. I remember John Amici, who's been on the show a couple of times. He's a former NBA player and also a psychologist. He tells a lovely story that he was in the gym of one of the NBA teams, and he was just taking it a little bit easy. And John is 6'9" and gargantuan. And he remembers a very famous coach, NBA coach, just came up behind him and very quietly in his ear just said, "You're always being watched." And he started to speed up because he realised actually that's exactly it. And so, we talk a lot of it. Again, he had a lovely way of describing leadership. He said, leadership is the promise of a lived experience for those around you. You create a shadow, you create an ecosystem around you, and you have an impact on people. So, Carol, what are your thoughts? Because I sometimes say to people, what's the most important leadership lesson that you've ever given or even received, or something that just really stands out for you at the moment?
I think, and then again, I guess I'm biased because I'm now married to him, but at the time I first met Stuart,
yes,
as I was talking about before, he came in with this psycho name tag, and I remember it was at Bredsfield Priory in Derby, and we were meeting up with the 21s for the first time. I'd never met him, and he was came striding down the driveway, very forceful. I'm quaking in my boots, thinking, "Oh my God, it's psycho! What the hell?" And we sat down as a staff the following day, and he just created a team, and it's something I've always I've learnt from that experience and the way he was the leader, in that he always made us feel like there was an environment we could be honest in. It was an environment that we could talk in.
Right.
So if I had something on my mind, I felt I could say it, and it would be listened to, it would be valued. Whether it was taken forward or not was almost irrelevant. But the fact that he would listen, or the rest of the staff would listen, that you felt valued, that you felt like you were part of the team, that you were empowered, and I know that's quite a big leadership word and used a lot, but it's so true. The fact that you're empowered to be who you are, and it gives you confidence, and that's something I now try and do as well, as I go through my sort of leadership and sort of from where I was then. Because that's something I'd never had really before, is being told, it's okay to speak up, say what you think, your views, your opinions, they are valued. Let's listen to them. And he created that environment, and creating an environment to be open and honest, I think is very important. And I think we were a fantastic team staff with that group. In fact, somebody some point sort of not accused, but sort of suggested we were empire building. But it wasn't. We had a group of leaders. And one quote, which I'd actually written down here, that we use quite a lot, is good leaders create followers. Great leaders create leaders. And I think that is so important, because as a leader...
There we go. That's a wonderful piece of advice, isn't it?
I think it's so true. In the world of elite sports, I know it might be a sweeping statement, but I think there is a danger of sort of doing that whole, this is mine, this is my environment, let me hold on to it as best I can, because there's a fear factor, because there's so many changes happen so quickly. There's always people behind you ready to take your job, because it's such a sort of a sexy industry almost.
A lot of focus on it.
And actually I was told when I first started by a boss that, well, if you don't like the job, if you don't like the pay, there's hundreds of people behind you that will take your job, so like it or not. And I think there's an element of that in elite sports. So leaders don't necessarily try and create other leaders. They want people following them, of course, they want to be that leader, but they don't necessarily want to find other leaders just in case they take over from them or take that job from them. But it's important. It's key that you leave behind
Yeah.
the people that can be the next you, the next leaders.
Well, I've done that. One of the things that I've always lived with as an entrepreneur is to try and make myself redundant as quickly as possible.
Hire those better than you.
Yeah, hire the people better than me.
We've had that
inspire
Surround
them.
conversation
yourself
before,
with people
actually.
that can do the job
Yeah.
as well as
100%.
you, better than you, because you'll have your things that you're good at.
Exactly.
And you'll also have your weaknesses.
Yeah.
We're humans. We all have our weaknesses. And if you can have somebody alongside you that's got that strength,
Yeah.
pass it on.
Yeah,
You've got to be self-assured as a
feel
leader,
free
aren't
to
you, though?
and,
crack on,
and-
you know?
and I think that's a really important point, and a unique quality for leaders is helping their followers, their teams, understand their weaknesses.
Absolutely.
Because not everyone can understand or knows their weaknesses. And a good leader will help them understand them and how to combat them or how to overcome them. And that's something I've seen in very few leaders, but those that have managed to do that have created high-performing teams.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love that. I can't really do any better than that, can I, really, to kind of finish off the episode. Listen, I just want to say a massive thank you to both of you for coming in. This definitely shows the power of the network, and we're actually going to be doing some more episodes soon. We're co-hosting some, and we're also getting, as I say, some people together, which might seem like an eclectic mix, but this is a good example of that.
It works.
So, it
That's
does
right.
work. I hope
Thank
you'll
you.
both stay connected
For
in relation to
for sure.
the work that's going on. But a big thank you for both coming back to the Leadership Enigma, and this will be going out very, very soon.
Pleasure.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you, Carol. Thank you, Adam.
Join us again next week for more curiosity and insight with the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with me on LinkedIn or visit us at www.leadersenigma.com. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms and on our dedicated YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining the community.